My name is Cassandra, but my friends often call me Cassie. I am half Austrian, half Canadian. I live in Hawaii. Welcome to a book video. I decided to make a book page in my Notion this year for the first time. I usually track all my books on Goodreads, but I love data and more in-depth data, so I thought I would make my own this year, and I was inspired by Destiny here on YouTube. For those wondering, yes, it is halfway through January, and yes, my Christmas decorations are still up. It's such a chore to take them down, and when I put them up, there's the excitement of Christmas is coming, so like I'm willing to put the work and the effort in, but to take it down, it's literally just cleaning. I thought I would talk a little bit about my reading goals for 2025. I did put on Goodreads that I want to read 80 books this year. Last year I read 66 books, which is actually a big decline from what I usually do, but it's because 2024 was the year of DNFs for me. So I think that number would be closer to 80 if I had actually finished them. And there's a lot of books that I stopped at 60%, 80%, 90%, but since I didn't finish them, I didn't count them last year. Hopefully in 2025, I will not have as many DNFs because I would love to get to 80 books read. I know it's possible. I just gotta not be in a book slump, not read bad books, and push through. If I'm already 80% there, I should finish it, even if it's like a hate read finish, just so I can add it to my stats. I plan on reading Beach Read by Emily Henry. I've never read any of her books. This is a contemporary romance, and I've had the paperback for a couple years now, so I think it's time. And I know for a lot of people, Emily Henry is their favorite author, so I definitely want to give her a try. Next, I have The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and I actually have read some of his books, the werewolf ones, and I'm pretty sure those were self-published. Now they're traditionally published, but back then when I was reading them, I think they might have been self-published, and maybe The House in the Cerulean Sea was his first traditionally published book. Next, I have Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, and that was actually a soft DNF for me back when it first came out. I think I got to 80% and then just never picked it up one day, and I was a little disappointed by that book, which was tough coming from a hardcore Sarah J. Maas fan back in the day. I discovered her many years ago. It might have been 2016, 2017. It was before Queen of Shadows was out, and only the first two books in the Court of Thorns and Roses series was out. So first I read Throne of Glass series and loved it, and then I read A Court of Thorns and Roses and A Court of Mist and Fury, which immediately became my #1 favorite book. So much so that the first time I read it, the second I finished the book, I flipped it back and started again because I could not leave that world. I was like, my jaw was on the floor. I was in love. And when I finished it the second time, I entered like a little depression, like the heaviest book slump ever, but also in my life because I couldn't cope with the fact that that world was not real and that I have to live here where the humans live. I do want to read that and all three of the books. I actually own all of them, even though I knew I didn't really like the first one. I knew I would eventually read and get through all of them. And I have A Court of Silver Flames, also by Sarah J. Maas, and this is another soft DNF for me, so another one where we have to push through. I disliked a bunch of stuff at the beginning of that book, and some stuff that didn't make sense to me, like going down the stairs is harder than going up. I don't know. Books, especially fantasy books, you definitely have to suspend your disbelief. Suspend your belief. Basically, I don't know what the right phrasing is, but basically you give the book certain leeway. Like, this is a magical world. Yes, when you eat a red berry, you travel to the moon. But there's certain things, like the fact that going down the stairs is more physically challenging than going upstairs, that I don't know, it's just hard for me to wrap my head around. And then it also made a character that I really love from the beginning of the book seem kind of shitty. A lot of people love that book, and I do think that I wasn't in a good headspace when I read it, so definitely want to give that one a try again, and I think I will have a good time. And I think there's a 6th one coming out, so I gotta be on top of it. Next, I have the 7-Year Slip. This is because I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I'm pretty sure it was on the top of the charts for the 2024 Goodreads Awards, so I do want to try that one. Next, I have Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is a YA romantasy, I think. Again, I've just heard really good things about it, except that one, I'm just a little hesitant because I've also heard that the 3rd book is not as good or left some people disappointed, so it sucks knowing that going into it. Same thing with the Crescent City series. I know people died over the 2nd book, which clearly Sarah J. Maas writes good 2nd books, because the same thing was in A Court of Thorns and Roses, but that a lot of people were disappointed by the 3rd book. So it's just a little hard to get like super excited knowing that I might have negative feelings towards the end. Next, I have Powerless, and I haven't read it yet, so definitely want to try that one. We actually have a fan fiction called The Auction. I read Manacled last year and I really loved it, and this is another one that is very, very popular. I actually read the prequel to this, which is Love in All the Right Places. No, it's definitely not that, but I will put the title up on the screen. Basically, the author had a plot line in this fanfiction, which is a Harry Potter fanfiction about Draco and Hermione, and she had a plot line about if there was an auction, this would have happened, and it was very important in that book, but it was like an imaginary scenario. But people loved it so much that in the comments they begged her to turn that idea into a book, and she ended up doing it. So this one is quite dark, as you can imagine, with a title like The Auction. Next, we have Throne of the Fallen, and this one is on this list because of Sarah Caroli here on YouTube. She really loves this book, and it's a romantasy, so I think that would just be really fun. Next, I have Spark of the Everflame, which was self-published on Kindle Unlimited and now has been traditionally published, and I think the 2nd book came out as well. Heard great things about it. It's actually also a soft DNF for me. I only got like 30 pages in or something, so definitely want to give that one a try again because I just probably wasn't in a good mood that day. We have another TikTok sensation here, which is When the Moon Hatched, a really fat book. Also self-published, now traditionally published, so lots of people love it and I want to see if I will too. The next book is a bit of an outlier, but it is Before I Fall, a book that was really popular when I was like a preteen or early teenager. I don't know why I didn't read it because I have been an avid reader since my preteen years. It somehow passed me by, but when the movie came out, I saw it in the cinema and I really loved it. I've actually seen that movie a few times, so I thought, why not read the book this year? Then we have The Golden Compass, which is actually one of my sister's favorite books and a classic in the world of fantasy, and I've just never read it, so I think that that could be really good. And I'm pretty sure he came out with a sequel or a 3rd book or something recently, even though the original book is quite old, so there will be some exciting newer content in case I love it so I can keep reading. Next, I have a very anticipated release for me, Bonds of Hercules, which is actually the 2nd book. I think the first one is called Blood of Hercules. I had a really long flight delay, and because it was so long, the airline actually gave me money to buy food at the airport, and I did that, and then I still had money left over, so I decided to browse the bookshop, and they had this book by Jasmine Mass, and it has some cool art in the front too. I read this entire book, which is 512 pages, in one sitting on the plane. I read it the entire flight. It was so freaking good. I was shocked. It was a 5-star read for me in 2024, and it might even be my favorite book of 2024 or definitely up there. I am pretty picky with my 5 stars. I give a lot of 4 stars, but 5 stars, I really gotta be obsessed. I've read a book by this author before called Psycho Beasts, which she self-published on Kindle Unlimited, and I wasn't a big fan. So I didn't think I would love this one so much, but this one is now traditionally published, which is really cool to know for a aspiring writer like myself, that even if I don't get traditionally published off the bat, that if I self-publish one day, I could be traditionally published. Right now, that is actually my most anticipated read of 2025. We're making our way through this list. Next, I have Sabriel, which is another older fantasy book that has kind of stood the test of time. It's a female lead, which wasn't as popular back then, and it's one of my sister's favorite books, and then also Sarah J. Maas said it was one of her favorites and has definitely inspired some of her writing. Then there's Aragon, which is another classic fantasy book with a male lead, which might be the only male lead book I read this year, unless I read or reread Harry Potter. Although Red Rising is also on my docket. Again, it's another book my sister loved growing up. Then I have An Ember in the Ashes, which is a series that's been around for a while, but is recently being rebranded and people are loving it. I love the new covers. The old ones were definitely giving YA. Then there's The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I've read Daisy Jones and the Six by her and then watched the show as well more recently. And I loved that book. I think I rated it 5 stars when it first came out. Funnily enough, I also read that one while traveling, but it was a road trip from Toronto to Washington, D.C. And I also read the whole thing in the car. I was crying in the car with other people, everything. I had a good time, but since then I have not read any other books by her. Pretty sure this is her most famous one, but I think that'll be a good time. Then there's Divine Rivals, a very popular YA fantasy that I also have the hardcover of, so want to read that this year. One Dark Window, another super popular book from last year that I just didn't try because I also have a little bit of treditation? I'm a little nervous when some books become hyper famous on TikTok or just hyper famous in general because I have been let down in the past. For example, I was not the biggest fan of Fourth Wing. I did also listen to that on audiobook instead of reading it, and I don't know if that hurt my case a little bit because my preferred method of reading definitely is physically reading. I do love audiobooks. It's just, I feel like maybe I can't get as deep into the story when it's an audiobook. I have The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker, one of the few contemporary books on this list. One of her old books is actually one of my favorite contemporary series of all time, which is The Wolf Hotel. And I'm not sure exactly if she started that book or if there's another author, I think called Nina West. And I don't know if Nina West abandoned that series and then K.A. Tucker finished it, or if they wrote it together, or because anyway, very confusing, but definitely K.A. Tucker wrote part, if not all, of The Wolf Hotel, which takes place in Alaska. And The Simple Wild also, I think, takes place in Alaska. So I think that would be a pretty fun book. Then we have The Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, which is another anticipated read for me. I've read a few of her books, one of her contemporary ones. I forget now which one, maybe Love Hypothetically, or maybe Love Theoretically, one of them definitely. And then I read Bride, which I did enjoy, but this is her foray into sports romance, so excited to read that. Then I have Quicksilver. Same spiel as a bunch of the other books I've said. Very famous, and I haven't gotten to it, so on the docket for this year. I have Crimson Moth, which is actually also a soft DNF for me. I got about 50% through, closed it one day, and then just never opened it up again, even though I did like it. I think we just got to like a slightly slower section. That's what happened there, so I will finish it one day. Lastly, we have The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which of course is the prequel to the Hunger Games series, which was one of my absolute favorites growing up, and I reread that series many times. So who knows, maybe reading the prequel will then trigger me to reread everything, and it could also trigger a rewatch of all the movies, and I also haven't seen the movie for the ballads. I'll see you next time. Bye. This is a test, because this is the second time I'm filming this. Mercy, do you have to cry? Okay, do you have something to say? Nothing. You were just pretending.